All right, welcome back to Problem Solver Politics. I am your host, Cardin Ellis, with Cody the Oracle.
Hey, everybody.
All right, we got some big news going on. Cody, let's dive right in. What's happening?
Well, according to, I believe it's Business Insider, a recent article has come out. We're going to go through it, but the headline's a big deal. I want to talk about this first because this really is kind of something we've been talking about for the campaign. Without further ado, undecided voters like Andrew Yang and Joe Biden the most of all 2020 Democratic candidates.
Whoa.
Now, we'll go through just the first few paragraphs here. So, undecided general election voters, most like the businessman Andrew Yang and former Vice President Joe Biden of all candidates. Undecided general election voters are a subset of particular interests as Democrats argue for appeal beyond their own party, and their support is elusive for all but two contenders. That's the big thing I want to hang up on here.
Wait.
So before we move on too far,
repeat that sentence really fast.
Exactly. I want to go back. Undecided general election voters are a subset of particular interest as Democrats argue for appeal beyond their own party, and their support's elusive for all but two contenders.
Yeah, okay, so this is it used to be like a third, and a third. There's the third that votes for you no matter what, the third that will never vote for you no matter what, and then this middle third. But as we get more partisan, that general election independent voter, in terms of registration, gets wider, but in terms of votership gets smaller. But it's still what decides elections, is that middle subset of independent, undecided voters. Yes, so... Now you continue. Sorry, I was making sure in my mind that we were talking about the right people.
Of course. Now, numbers are important. There was 268 people, but of 268 undecided voters who knew of Yang, 46% said they would be satisfied with him as the nominee, and 24% said they would not be satisfied, giving him a positive net support of 21 points. Why that's a big deal, Biden, as you can see later on down here, Biden had a larger sample size of 620 voters, but he only had a +7 difference between people who have heard about him and would like if he was a nominee, and heard him who wouldn't like his nominee. So realistically, Yang is the one doing very well. Again, it's 268 people. We like to talk about sample sizes. It's not a very large sample size, right? A couple hundred people. But that is what we're looking at here. So before we get further and take a further look at the study and go some further stuff here, I just thought it'd be interesting to talk really quickly about what does it actually mean when it looks like, according at least to this study right here, and again, we're going to go through and take a deeper look at it, it looks like this is why we are seeing a slower rise in Andrew Yang's polls, despite we're seeing the money increase. We're seeing the interest increase. We're seeing his exposure increase. We're seeing him go out and spend that money to hire legit people. We're seeing him really becoming and establishing the Yang 2020 campaign as a legitimate campaign.
Yeah.
But we're not seeing polls move. Is that what we're seeing? Are we seeing people who are like, I'll give him $10. I like Yang, and then but when they call and say, who are you giving your support for? They still say, I don't know.
Okay.
They still say or they just say, like there's still something about him, but that could be what we're seeing. It's tough to say, but just again, we'll take some deeper look at the numbers they pulled up here in a minute. But I just want to get your thought on that, because that to me that makes sense. Like a guy who's doing a lot of good work pulling undecided voters, because again, a lot of these undecided voters might not, a lot of the time when they do these polls, they'll try different kinds of polls. Yeah. You'll see a lot of polls and they'll say, we're targeting registered Democratic voters, right?
And also,
Yang might be winning people who aren't necessarily all registered Democratic voters, so they don't get polled, and then could be interest gain. Now, it could also be that there's a million other factors, but I just thought it was an interesting story.
I think a lot of the problem comes from really the semantics of this, because I've never really liked how they call them undecideds. It's one of the few things I like that California does electorally, is that we don't call them independents, because technically independent is a party, and you can be an independent thinker and still be a party affiliated. And undecided, I don't think is correct, because there's that there's that insinuation of indecision. And I don't think people are necessarily indecisive if they're not convinced by one or another in this moment, okay? I actually like how California calls them declined states. You know what I'm saying? Where they just decline to state them. Because in my opinion, this undecided pool that we're always polling and always talking about is really just normal people with just normal thought processes that are not necessarily completely tied to a party. In many aspects, I feel more DTS, which stands for decline to state, than I do Republican some days. Sure as heck not going to do the Democrat thing, but, that's usually the way most people feel. They might say, oh, I'm declined to state, but sure as heck ain't going to do the Republican thing, But I want to wait to be convinced. I'm not sold on you. Does that make sense? That's kind of the thought process that these people go through. And so to me, when I hear this data, it goes through the Carden-Ellis processor, and this is an opinion, obviously. But to me, it says normal people are paying attention to Andrew Yang now and generally, more often than not, like him. Would you say that's a fair way of simplifying the argument that's going on?
It could be, yeah.
Is that normal people, when they get to hear Andrew Yang's message, it goes one ear, computes, and comes out the other as, I like this guy.
Well, I would say people who are not currently involved in like the current political climate and the current, let's just say,
they're not insiders.
Heightened. But I'm saying people who read like all these stories and go, I don't care, man. It's all nonsense to me. And then they hear someone say, hey, what about like healthcare and jobs and the economy? Those kind of voters get won over, not the kind of voters who are like, I am really interested in Trump and how we beat him. Those aren't necessarily the undecideds. You know what I mean? If you hate Trump and want him gone, you're probably not undecided. But if you're like, look, man, I'm not a big guy in politics. I try to just focus on my own stuff. But this guy's talking about stuff that I see happen in my daily life. Yeah. He's courting them. But again, those aren't people being courted by pollsters, not being courted by the DNC, and maybe not even the RNC necessarily all the way anymore, because now the RNC is kind of looking for Trump defenders. That's kind of like I said, there's like anti-Trump battleground, and voters who are outside of this anti-Trump or pro-Trump battleground feel like they have no real candidates. And I think Andrew Yang is one of those few on the outside where you can look and say, oh, his campaign isn't about why Trump's bad or good, right? Like his campaign's about helping the country, and that's what I'm focused on. And again, those aren't the voters that the pro-Trump defenders and the anti-Trump army are courting. Those aren't the people they're asking questions for. I think that's kind of what we're seeing. Like you said, regular average people who aren't all wrapped up in this stuff hear him speak and go, oh, wow. Like I said, I vividly remember the time that I was watching the Joe Rogan podcast, like many, and I was like, this Yang guy's pretty interesting.
Perfect analogy. That's a great analogy,
but I was like, this Yang guy's pretty interesting, but I don't know. I mean, he's saying a lot of weird stuff. And then when he started talking about what he calls now human-centered capitalism a little bit, just the idea where he's talking, like, like our life expectancies go down. Like our suicide and overdose rates are going up, and that's bad. I'm like, yeah, it is bad. And he's like, and there's reasons why in this country, and I'm going to solve those things. And I'm like, you know what? If someone's running for president and their idea is, I don't want citizens of my country killing themselves and dying because of drug overdoses needlessly and being in like all these miserable situations, I'm like, okay, I can get behind that movement. That's an easier movement than protect Trump at all costs or he's got to go. Let's have people live happy, longer lives. I'm like, yeah, man, I'm all for that. So I think people like me or just people who are a little bit more on the sidelines of the current debate hear him and say, I like what he's saying. But again, are those people getting landline poll calls? Are those people going out of their way to voice support? Or are those people who are just like, I like the guy, I'd probably vote for him, but that's about it, right?
Yeah, it's this reminds me very much. We were talking just a couple of days ago how Andrew Klein, the famous union boss in the early 19-teens, had said, first they ignore you, then they mock you, then they fight you and want to burn you, then they build monuments to you, which has now been simplified and often misattributed to Gandhi as saying, first they ignore you, then they mock you, then they fight you, then you win. Okay. And we said that he's getting into the fight you phase. Well, I've also said often on this program that, up until pretty much almost nowish, it usually starts happening in January, but up until now, the muggles are the ones. The wizards are the ones that are tuned in, the insiders, the people that run podcasts, the people that dissect political media every day, the people that know how many electoral votes Maine and Wyoming have in comparison to California and Florida. Those are the people that are tuned in right now. And so those are the people that are really possibly answering questions, answering polling data, and so on and so forth. But things drastically change when that huge subset of America starts tuning in, the muggles, we jokingly call them, that really, what do you mean you don't like that? You don't like that analogy?
I don't like Harry Potter.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm not a big Harry Potter fan either, if I'm totally honest with you. But I see the value in the analogy in terms of its pop culture palpability. But anyway, the muggles haven't tuned in yet. And this is data that shows your average person, the muggles, like Andrew Yang. They like his message. And this is data that Elizabeth Warren doesn't have.
Well, that's what I want to talk on. Before we bury this too much, this is important. So you might ask, so Andrew Yang is a plus 22 or 21% support favorability. amongst the specific subset of voters, which are undecided voters. They don't know if they're going Republican or Democrat that have been polled. And again, the polls they're doing, they've actually, see if I can find, Business Insider's been running a series of SurveyMonkey polls. Here we go. To help make sense of where all the 2020 candidates stand, Insider's been collecting a recurring SurveyMonkey audience national poll. You can download every poll here. All of that link if you guys want to see it. Point being, they've been asking people for a while multiple questions, and they've been getting these data points. So again, Yang's at plus 21. Why is that significant? Well, Biden, Yang, and Mayor Pete of South Bend were the only Democrats with net positive support among undecided general election voters. And you might ask again, so but
wait,
still,
repeat that? Can you repeat that?
Of the three of all Democrats running, 3 had a positive net rating. Basically, I don't know who I'm voting for, but if it was Buttigieg, okay, I'm fine with it, or I'm not happy with it.
So that literally means, correct me if I'm wrong, that their unfavorable rating was so high that it handicapped their favorability rating.
Or the inverse. Like,
yeah.
Or the inverse. Like, nobody cared. Because, again, and the reason why I wanted to
not even Donald Trump is doing that right now.
Well, I don't know about that. But
or like Trump's disapproval rating, I think, is like 49%, but his approval rating is 53, so he's net 4.
Not really. It's kind of a different thing. Anyway, though, I wanted to get to this, okay? Because you brought up Elizabeth Warren.
Yeah.
Senator Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren have slightly negative net support among undecided general election voters at 2 percentage points. Underwater Rep Tulsi Gabbard net support is negative 1 point. Interesting. I would have thought Tulsi would have been doing okay with undecideds as well. Interesting. Kamala Harris is underwater by 13 points, and Tom Steyer and Castro are both underwater by 14 points.
Jeez.
I'm going to say behind instead of underwater this next time. It feels like a little excessive. And then Beto O'Rourke is behind by 17 points, and Booker 20. The Booker one feels to me more just complete indifference if he gets elected. Everyone said, I don't care if he gets elected. And then there's some people who are like, I wouldn't like it if he was him. And nobody said they would have, I would have to imagine. Again, we'll go through and show you some more stuff. But like you were saying, it is really important to know. Oh, sorry. I was on the screen for you guys. I'm going to show you guys the data on screen. It is really important to point out that this is the level of support we're not seeing other candidates receive. So again, when we look at the polls, this kind of could be that shadow base that in primary polls is holding Yang back. However, if the shadow base maintains its status as shadow base and doesn't even vote in the primaries, he's out, right?
Yeah.
But this looks like a base. And again, they mentioned in this article, and it's really important for Democrats to gauge when they're moving forward. If nobody outside of your party is considering you at all, and most undecided voters are like, I don't want any of your people running, bad sign for the party. Because guess what? A Democrat's going to win the Democratic primary. That's not a controversy.
Yeah.
But is a Democrat going to win general election? Right now, based on the Business Insider data, it looks like in general, unless it's Biden or Yang, probably people have to do these head-to-head polls, Yang or Trump versus a candidate. I always like to look at those polls because if you take a look at them, generally speaking, 90% of the time, every Democrat beats Trump, which would be a pretty big upset since the incumbents don't lose generally. I like looking at this data instead.
The new data
that says the swing voters, the undecided, the potential swing voters, the current undecideds in these polls, they're leaning Yang, Biden, sort of Mayor Pete, not really, and no one else.
Yeah, and also you have to be very careful viewership here. We have a very diverse viewership, and so it's so interesting. We have to be very precise in how we represent data here because it's so easy to misinterpret it if you're a progressive and you want to see good news for the progressives, or if you're a conservative and you want to see good news for the conservatives or the libertarians or the moderates, whatever you self-identify as, okay? It is true that in many generalized candidate polls, the Democrats right now are performing better. That's because these polls basically go like this. Hi, if you had to choose between just your average Republican and your average Democrat, who would you go for right now? Well, knowing that Donald Trump's Republican and living in this media-fueled environment that hates Republicans, your average person might say, I feel more comfortable with the Democrat. And whenever they ask these subsets of 400, 500, 1,000 people in these polls, who would you rather vote for, Joe Biden or Donald Trump? Would you rather vote for Cory Booker or Donald Trump? Elizabeth Warren, Donald Trump. Andrew Yang, Donald Trump. Our friend John Delaney or Donald Trump. Generally, the Democrats fare well. And most people, when asked, might say, I would prefer Joe Biden over Donald Trump. But here is the problem. How that converts into reality is dependent upon another stat that is not included in these first two polls, and that is turnout. what actually motivates people to want to get up and vote at all. If they're sitting on their sofa and the phone rings and they ask, who do you prefer, John Delaney or Donald Trump? Sure, maybe 53% might just say the generalized Democrat or John Delaney. They prefer to Donald Trump. But what motivates them to get up out of that sofa and go to the voting booth is a completely different story. And right now, all of the data that is coming out shows that basically, unless Democrats have a turnout of in excess of or equal to the turnout that Barack Obama had as America's first African-American president, as the urbane, young, and cool and hip candidate versus the old establishment John McCain, that unless we see that kind of turnout in 2020, at best, Democrats could win with about 9 electoral points. But if we just have normal turnout, they're going to lose in an almost landslide. And if we have low turnout because there's not an enthusiastic opposition to Donald Trump, he'll actually win in like a nearly 400 electoral point landslide. I mean, it would just be a brutal historical victory. So you can't get too caught up in polls of.
But like you were just saying, man, to be honest, that kind of stuff is just so speculative, because Donald Trump had a 99% chance of losing.
Moody's
right? Now he's got 99%. This stuff
Moody's
just,
economic turnout, and we could do a different video on this, but in a nutshell, Moody's economic turnout graphs have correctly predicted turnout and economic enthusiasm for a candidate and who's going to win based off of economic enthusiasm, okay? Every single election since 1980. Now, it's a very small subset of data, okay? So it has to be taken in context and it can't be abused for other information. All I'm simply trying to say is that it's good news for Yang that average people like his message. And this data is showing if average people like your message and you make it to the nominee, there's a chance that you will drive higher turnout in opposition to Donald Trump. So if I were sitting at the DNC and if I were Tom Perez, I'd be really paying close attention to whose message actually convinces independents. Because no matter what the superdelegates and the delegates think about Elizabeth Warren, if nobody really likes her that much that they'll get up out of their seat to vote for her on election day, you're going to be really embarrassed, no matter how cool you think her plan that lowers costs but somehow doesn't magically up taxes is.
Yeah, but dude, that's yes, the Democrats do have a plan. I disagree with it, but they do have a plan.
Yeah.
No, I'm saying they do. Their plan is they're going to basically make it when we get to 2020. They're going to try to say, look, if you want Trump out, which is so hilarious to me, they're going to try to like hinge impeachment on the election. But it's like, if you want Trump out and he loses the election, he's gone anyway. Like, I don't. But anyway, that's their plan is telling people, look, we have to get Trump out, and they're trying to engage voters who didn't turn out in 2016, who were indifferent then. And they're trying to tell these people Trump is such an existential threat. You can't be indifferent like you were in 2016. You got to vote now. That's their plan. I disagree with it. I don't think it's going to work. I don't think there's enough people out there. If you didn't vote in 2016 and maybe you'll vote in 2020, I just don't know if they're going to find, whatever that magic number of votes is. I don't know if they're going to find it that way. Yeah. I think they're going to find it the Yang way by going to undecided people, going to former Trump voters. Because remember, there's this thing I think that people that are really big and gung-ho in politics do all the time, where they'll be like I ride or die Yang. People will be like that. I don't ride or die Yang. I'm always open to switching candidates because I don't.
Wait, what's ride I?
There's people saying like I will ride or die for my candidate.
Oh, ride or die.
No matter what, I'm with Trump. I'm with Bernie. No matter what, I'm with Warren. Don't care what happens. Right?
Okay.
People who are like that, they see that someone voted for another candidate and in their head like lost vote because they know I ride or die Hillary. I would never vote for someone else. But there's a lot of people. Most voters would be like, I wonder how many people every election vote for someone and regret it like 5 days later. Like, why'd I vote for him? Like there's a lot of voters out there who like voted for Trump supporters. They're just undecided moderate types who are like, I don't like Hillary. Like those voters, Democrats can still win. Yeah, you're not going to win the defend the president at all costs crowd.
Yeah.
But you're going to win the, I voted for Trump because I didn't trust Hillary crowd. You can win that audience. And That's the move Yang's pushing
Well,
for.
and we've already got
And
proof that
we're seeing other. You'll notice something. Biden gets dragged and fought and kicked and punched by other Democrats every single week because he's not on the he's not in the battleground enough.
Yeah.
But again, remember, there's a reason why. There's a reason why undecided voters like the outsider Andrew Yang, who basically isn't a Democratic establishment, and the former Democratic vice president of this country, because they're seeing a certain different thing. Now, it's not going to work for Biden because the Biden campaign weirds me out. I don't get it. There's
the Biden campaign weirds me out, dude.
They're not raising a lot of money. They're spending a ton of money.
$1 million on private jets.
But I don't hear about them a ton. I don't get the sense
there's
that
no
it's
enthusiasm.
But it doesn't feel like this is like Andrew Yang. Andrew Yang's even said there's no Senate run for me after this. Yeah. This is a Hail Mary. I'm gonna win the White House, or I don't know what's gonna happen. I feel like Joe Biden's like, dude, win or lose. It'd be nice to beat Trump, but and that's
at the end of the day, I'll still collect my speaking fees.
That's the enthusiasm I'm getting from it, and I don't know, man. I do think this stuff's relevant. And again, the last thing I want to touch on, the reason I wanted to bring it up, I do think a lot of people are asking why is he not moving in the polls. I think the reason why Yang's not moving in the polls, while he's courting a base, and again, this might lead to a Yang VP spot because he's courting a base to Democrats.
Dude, I don't like that, man.
And I actually don't know what his latest answer.
I think that would really dilute the Yang gang, but that can be a different video.
No, but here's the thing.
Yeah,
Andrew Yang is courting the base the Democrats are having the hardest time courting. He's courting it more than anyone else.
Which means that he should continue as his own candidate, and freaking Biden should be his VP.
Well, no, what I'm saying is,
he's got almost as much money as Biden right now, and
I think he has more on hand, actually.
Yeah, and I don't know. If I were looking, I feel like to a certain extent I've said my piece, but if I were looking from my chair at the DNC at this, I'll be paying much closer attention to Andrew Yang because he's converting. He's doing much better. He's holding his own amongst the Democrats, but and this might be an indictment of just primaries in general, but we see this in our audience. We have data that proves what you just said, Cody. Do you remember
anecdotes?
That? Well, no, you could call it anecdotal. No, it's not anecdotal data. It's straw poll, so it's not a scientific poll. But when we even straw polled our own audience, 15% were ex-Trump voters.
No, yeah.
You remember that? No other Warren gang can't say that. You know what I'm saying? The Biden gang can't say that. Nobody else can say that. And that's
the question.
That's a measurable quantifier.
It is, but that doesn't. Does courting Trump voters win you a Democratic primary? That's the question here. I don't know what the answer is.
No, but I think if, and once again, if they were smart, people would be attracted. If they were really honestly trying to replace the competition and not just slander him, they would actually be very interested in the person that could strategically do that. And the data is showing that, okay, amongst the muggles and amongst the normal class, Biden's got some clout because I guess he's still perceived out there amongst the average people as a moderate. Okay. And he was part of the Obama coalition. So there's probably some rose-colored glasses through which they are looking upon him. Okay, fine. And who's the only other person pulling that data? Andrew Yang. So it now becomes a question of, do you want the hip young tech entrepreneur who's got 135 different policy proposals that all seem better than any piece of legislation you've passed in your 40 years in Congress, Joe Biden? Or do you want the guy who's rupturing blood vessels on stage and can't hear what other people are saying next to him? And because he's so dang good looking, we forget that he's like nearly 80 years old. You know what I'm saying? There's who's going to generate that enthusiasm.
What do you get with this Joe Biden's good looking thing? I'm not going to get into it.
Oh, he's a handsome devil. Go look at him as a young man, and I'm telling you, I was gay for 30 seconds when I saw his picture out of Georgetown.
I'm not getting into it.
No, I'm just kidding. So anyway, we can end it right here. I mean, I think we've set our pace. Yeah. Let us know what you guys think. Let us know if there's any additional data that can be added to this conversation. If you haven't liked or subscribed to this channel or this video, please like and subscribe and join us on Tuesdays and Thursdays on Twitch. Also, make sure you leave us a voicemail. Express your voice. Let us know what you think. We still try and analyze all the voicemails we get at 1-833-PSP-RADIO. This is Problem Solver Politics. We'll see you in the next video.